to our town. Dorothy Thompson speaking to you today from the Mill Pond Community Garden, our Richland Center area garden. And gardening is the subject of our show. Well, those blossoms, they're food for the bees and the birds and the other critters around. From this garden, we'll go down to Spring Green and talk to Spring Green gardener Roger Reynolds. He has a program for us entitled Your Landscape is for the Birds and Other Wildlife.
Hello, I'm Roger Reynolds, and we're near Spring Green at the Spring Green Town Hall, and we're out in nature. We're going to talk about this landscape is for the birds and other wildlife. And to start with, I want to talk about, landscapes are our turf grass lawn, our yards around our houses. They are for us, but they also can be for wildlife. And so we're going to go into that. And speaking about them being for us, I've started to work on something and teaching something called Mindfulness in Nature. And I'm just going to give a quick little example of it, and it'll come up as we go through this tour. So mindfulness in nature, mindfulness is about paying attention to your breath, your emotions, your thoughts, your senses, and your surroundings. And mostly we're going to talk about our surroundings and our senses, but to calm down, you can use mindfulness to calm down. And so first, you can just take a couple deep breaths and just pay attention to your breath. And then senses are what I'm seeing right now. And what you're seeing behind me is I'm out in nature. So there's some dormant lawn behind me. There's evergreen trees behind me. I can hear some birds, and there's other sound. I don't have any real smells right now. If I were to break some of the pine needles open, there would be some smell to those pine needles. And there's poison ivy over there, which I need to be mindful to not get into that and be aware, another part of awareness. And then we can see what we hear and just kind of take it in. And whether we focus on one of those senses or we focus on different ones, there's nothing really here to taste, although mulberries are in season, June berries just ended, there's some wild plants, anise hyssop, and some other things that are growing that taste good. So those are just a part of being mindfulness, of just being aware. And people use both their lawn and there was some sounds, part of the human landscape, the human soundscape. Some traffic went by and they were upset with one another. You may or may not have heard that. And but that's part of what happens. And part of mindfulness, sometimes those upset moments, is if we can take a couple deep breaths and focus on what's around us. And there's a thing called the five senses, where something you're seeing, something you're hearing, something you're smelling, something your body's feeling, and also something you might be tasting, is a way to just kind of bring you down when you have one of those, somebody just cut me off in traffic and I'm ticked off. So that's how you can use mindfulness. I'm teaching it both at the Spring Green Library, and you can go to their website and their calendar, the first and third Saturday of the month, and also at the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, which you can go to their website, and I'm teaching there on the second Saturday of the month, and it's a 3-hour mindfulness in nature outdoors there. So with that, and thinking of humans and our environment and taking care of ourselves and bringing nature into our lives, but then also taking care of and including nature in our landscape and helping nature, we look at this dormant lawn. We're the end of June. We're in a drought season. We're in the Wisconsin River Valley, which is dry, pure sand, and things are really dormant here. Typical lawns are going to go dormant. Normally they wouldn't be dormant in June, but we're so dry that it is. But I want to show, as we think about nature, and we just come right over here, and I mentioned there's poison ivy, so I'm not going to walk into the trees, but right here you can see there's trees, there's some oak trees, there's some evergreen, a few other bushes, but what we see is these trees are alive. They certainly have habitat for birds and insects and wildlife, and we also see, even just on the ground, by the shade of these trees and not being mowed, this vegetation is still actively growing. It's not in a dormant state. And so it's interesting as we think about, like, what does wildlife, what do birds need, what do insects need? So one of the things all of wildlife needs: shelter, food, and water. And turfgrass lawn really doesn't provide much habitat at all. And so we'll just walk down along this a little bit. Here's a mulberry bush, mulberry tree. It doesn't have any fruit right now. It might be too young, or it might be a male plant, but it still provides perching. It probably is growing it probably has some caterpillars and some bugs on it. And one of the things about nature that we just don't think about is how much food it takes for wildlife to survive. And birds right now are in their nesting season, and chickadees, some research has been done with chickadees, and most birds, even though they might eat seeds and fruit, they feed their young insects, and usually a lot of caterpillars. So chickadees need 350 to 500 caterpillars a day to feed a clutch of chicks. So in that 18 days, they need 5,000 to 6,000 or 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in 2 to 3 weeks to bring those chicks up to being able to fledge. And those caterpillars grow on, and those other insects grow on this green vegetation, because they eat the leaves and stuff, and then the chickadees and the nuthatches and the cardinals all go, and you'll see them going around these places, and sometimes you see them in your garden getting the insects, and they're getting them to feed their chicks. So, and also, although I'm going to avoid the poison ivy and I'm very aware of it, this also, it can be calming to us just to look at nature. And part of how we use nature is a lot of people thinking of mindfulness and just calming down. I know a lot of people who really enjoy working in their garden, looking at their flowers, watching birds, or seeing a deer come into their yard, or seeing a fox come into their yard. Maybe some people enjoy seeing raccoons, some people don't enjoy seeing raccoons, but squirrels are fun, rabbits are fun, and all of this is part of the ecosystem, and it does touch our spirit. It does touch us to, like, see them, and sometimes we're happy and sometimes we're not, but usually, like, watching birds is pretty calming and happy for people. And one of the first things you could do to make your lawn or your yard better for wildlife is to just put out some source of water, because everything needs water. We've got air, but the next thing we need frequently is water. And just putting out some shallow dish of water, 3 to 4 inches deep, with a couple rocks in it so birds don't get stuck and drown. Anywhere from just a simple metal pan, like for feeding livestock, to decorative bird baths, to fountains, to even a children's plastic sled with a few rocks in it. Birds will love it, and other wildlife will come at night. So adding water just to your landscape is the first thing you can do to help. Bird feeders are another thing. But going back to this turfgrass lawn, which is very dormant, now I want to show you what it looks like when it's being watered. And it's over here. We're at the village town hall, and you can hear some equipment in the background. Being aware of mindfulness. That mindfulness is, like being aware of what do you hear and see at any time. What draws our attention? A beeping backing up piece of construction equipment catches my attention. But here's the turfgrass lawn. This is being watered, and you can see it looks really, really, really different than the dormant. But if we think about habitat, food, water, and shelter for wildlife, this is very limited shelter. It's 2 to 3, maybe at most 4 inches tall. Nothing like those trees over there. Even though some caterpillars and insects could live in here, they don't have much shelter, they don't have much cover. And so in terms of like feeding wildlife, we don't see any birds flying around here. There might be some bugs, but I don't see them right now. And so turf grass lawn does not provide much shelter or habitat for wildlife. So we're gonna go now to just one little thing in this landscape, in this turf grass lawn, that adds, and I'm now aware of a big diesel truck pulling something away, and this is part of our natural modern lives. The truck is created by humans, and we can be aware of it, and yeah, it is not fun to listen to in nature. It's not as nice as listening to birds, but it happens. And so like part of mindfulness is like letting the moment go. So like that truck went on, and now I'll continue talking about nature, and we'll move now to just a little piece of bringing nature into your home yard, your home landscape. And that's called a pollinator garden. It's done with native plants. And here's a little sign that talks about the pollinator garden. And you'll see there's something blooming here. I've just stuck in a couple decorations, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's something blooming. It's green. Now I don't think this has been watered, and yet this is not dormant like the turf grass surrounding it. There would be food here for insects. There's some habitat. And you'll also see that the dead material from last year was left here. And if we look at this sign, which we just looked at, this area provides food, nesting, and resting for pollinators. And part of that nesting for pollinators, for insects, is that some of them overwinter either by laying eggs or crawling into the stems of plants in the fall. And so leaving these plant stems here lets the adults either come out or lets the young hatch from the eggs and come out into the same plant that they used last year. Now, people like to clean up their flower beds, and that's okay. But what can still help the insects is if you wanted to clean up this dead stuff either in the fall or in the spring, you could just go throw it over into some wilder area, like those trees over there, and those insects, those eggs and those adults can still come out and continue their life cycle. Instead of burning it, instead of taking it to a waste place, if you just have a place where you can toss it under some bushes, you could even put it under bushes and put some new wood mulch on top of it, and those insects will still have a better chance than if you took them to a landscape throwaway place or burned it up. Now, I stuck a few decorations in here. When we do a little garden like this, just bringing in a little bit, we can add decorations to it. Just because it's native or because it's like for wildlife, we still can make it attractive to us. This is a sprinkler that I really love. I don't have it hooked up here because it's not my place, but this sprinkler is copper, has a little decoration on the inside, but when it's watering, the holes are drilled in this tube so it actually spins. So not only is this a sprinkler to add water if you need, but it goes into motion and is pretty fun. And this is a little cattail wind chime, which I'll ring it here a little bit. I'll get them to hit each. There we go, got a little chimes there. And just, so we're actually emulating some plant from nature in a copper sculpture. One other thing about putting a little garden in your landscape, because people like the mower in the family will be like, now I have to mow around it. Well, one of the things they've done here that I recommend is do a 1 to 2 foot of wood mulch around a garden bed, and then the mower wheels can go right over this mulch, and it helps reduce grass and stuff from your lawn from creeping in there. And if you see it creeping in, you can pull it out. And it also makes it easy for the mower to mow up to it, not mow off your plants, and yet keep the lawn mowed, which we humans like. So here we are at the Spring Green Preserve of the Nature Conservancy, the west portion, which is at the north end of Pearl Road. A lot of people are used to the east portion, which is on Jones Road. And so we are about 2 miles north of where we just were with the dormant turf grass lawn. And this is a really dry area. I'll show you over here. We can see that they are mining sand because we're on very deep sand in the Wisconsin River Valley. It says pure sand. Our well is 165 feet deep. Our well is 175 feet deep. They went 165 feet down pure sand, hit 10 feet of sandstone, and then drew the water. So this is very deep sand. Back there, you can see they're mining for it. And above that, you see this hillside that has pretty much very little, it has a little bit of grass, but not much vegetation. It's called the goat prairie. And it is like that because it's steep and dry and faces south, and it dries out so much that it just grows. Trees have a really hard time getting started there, and so it just grows this short native prairie vegetation. Over this way, we'll see some of the agricultural fields, and we see what anybody's used to seeing around Spring Green is these big irrigation systems, because the ground is so dry. It is this pure sand, and so this is where the crops, to grow these crops, they need to be irrigated. And there's someone working on it right now to get it going, but that's part over here. And now we'll just turn back around, going back to the east. There's another hillside here. It's another one of these goat prairies that is so steep and grows very little vegetation because it keeps being dry. And I'm just going to add a little funny piece here, being a human, is growing up with Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner and seeing them roll in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I think there's another one where they start a snowball at the top of the hill and roll it down. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, this is one of the places I've actually tried to do that. It is not as easy as it looks in the cartoons. And so anyway, but this is one of the places where it's steep enough, there's no trees, and every now and then when we get the right amount of snow and I'm not busy, I try to come here and try that, and I'll keep working on that. So now we'll go in closer and show you more of the native landscape that are some of the plants that inspired the pollinator garden we just saw. And this, I want to just have you see in this drought conditions on pure sand, the difference of what native plants are doing versus what turfgrass lawn is doing. This is probably still I'll talk about cool season grasses versus warm season grasses. People hear that. The grass that we use for our turfgrass lawns is usually cool season grass. And what cool season grass means, and also I'll just keep this concise, the grass that we use for hay is also cool season grasses versus warm season grasses. Cool season grasses means that they start growing early in spring, like April into early May. The warm season grasses of the prairie don't start growing till May into June. And so right here we can see this grass, and I'm not sure which it is, but when we get in farther, you'll see a difference. This is Nature Conservancy Preserve, and this area is called the Wisconsin Desert because there's so much sand and it's so dry. And when we get in a little bit farther, you'll see that this grass doesn't exist, and this is the edge of the preserve. Probably was field for a bit. It's probably harder to get rid of the non-native species, but in farther we'll see a difference, and so we'll keep working that way. And we start to see some natives here, these cute little flowers. It's a vervain, I'm not sure which one, but here they are on the sand, and they're actually growing and flowering, with nobody's watering them out here. There's more of those. As we work our way in, I'm not sure what's going on with the oak trees. They do burn this. And I'm pretty sure that this was burned this spring, and we'll see signs of that a little bit farther. Actually, we can see right now why I think this was burned this spring is because, see, there's no dead plant material here. And so that makes me think that they burned it this spring, because hopefully we'll come back here a few more times through the growing season. You'll see this actually does grow more, and if we get some rain, it'll help it too. Here's a grapevine that's doing pretty well. Probably has some deeper roots, established for a few years. As we walk, you probably see that hillside, and you can see there's woodland forest all around it, but that area where it's so dry and so steep does not grow woodland. here we can start to see one of the trademark species that people know. If they know of the Wisconsin desert, they know this plant right here. It is a native wild cactus. And down in Texas and Arizona, these will grow 10 to 12 foot tall. Here they survive winter by drying up. And this was burned this spring, I'm pretty sure. And so they've got some damage from the burning, but they're doing fine. And what I wanted to point out is we start to see a couple of their blossoms. There's a few of them in here. You'll see that this landscape is pretty open, but right here is one of them, and you can step right up here. There's a bug inside it. So when I told you native plants give habitat for insects, here's an example. These flowers last one day. They produce a fruit that does have edible parts. There's a couple more blooming over there, and we'll see some more of them blooming. But also what I wanted to point out here is you see this brownish dry grass. Now, this doesn't get mowed, but this grass came up early. I don't know which grass it is, but it came up early. It has already completed its life cycle. It's gone to seed, and so before the drought could affect it, it got to do its life cycle for the season. And we'll see a lot of that as we walk up through here. I don't know which grass it is, but it's successful already in this it's an early season grass. A monarch butterfly just took off. And here we start to see, here's some common milkweed that is blooming. More of the vervain, a couple milkweeds here, and we'll see more. And I forgot to mention the orange plant we saw in that little pollinator garden is another plant in the milkweed group. And so a lot of us are here's a monarch right here, coming towards us or towards the milkweed. It's going to go right to that milkweed. So in this desert area with just a few milkweeds, this is part of why even a little pollinator garden, even a little native flower garden in your yard, they will find it. And part of why it's so important is, maybe you know or maybe you don't know, monarchs migrate to Mexico for the winter. And this one is going to lay some eggs, male or female, and it won't be one that migrates. They have 3 to 4 generations up here, and that last generation is the generation that migrates. There's going to both, and it's on the flowers, most likely drinking nectar out of those flowers. And I think we just got mating. We have 2 right there mating. So the birds and the bees are doing what the birds and the bees do. And she will end up laying eggs on those. So here's proof of what these native plants can do for the insect wildlife. So why these gardens become so important in the fall is, imagine if you had to go from Wisconsin to central Mexico walking. You're gonna need water, you'll have air, and you're gonna need food. And so even putting in a small, 20, 30, 40 square foot pollinator garden, here they go. And hey, I didn't plan it. They didn't sign a contract, but I'm really glad they're here. Oh, there's a third. And so these little pollinator gardens, or bigger pollinator gardens, that have late blooming flowers blooming into the fall, like New England asters are one of those. There's pink and white and purple, blue. They're really beautiful. They survive frost, and those provide nectar for these butterflies that are flying to Mexico. So they literally are life support systems. These butterflies they need life support, and those gardens with late blooming flowers provide them nectar to fly from here to Mexico. And so that's why it's important to have these for these insects. And here we see they're doing the next generation right here in front of us. Now we'll keep moving on. Now if we look around the landscape here, we can see more of that brown grass that I mentioned is already done. It's already made seed. We'll see some more of the cactus blooming here. There's a few blooms here. And in the path that we're walking, we'll start to see more of that vervain, a good amount of it here. There's a little oak tree. And here's, with a different butterfly on it, here is a puccoon that's pretty yellow, really golden yellow flower, and it has a butterfly on it. And notice when we were in the turf grass lawn with the pollinator garden, we didn't see that much insect life. I don't know that we saw any. When we walked up to it, one insect left. Here we are out in this native landscape with native plants, and we're seeing a good amount of insect life without even trying. There's a bunch of little bitty flies right here, or midges, I don't know what, gnats or something. Not that we enjoy the gnats, but they are food for other wildlife. And so you're just seeing, even though this landscape is dry, we're in drought conditions, it is providing shelter and food for insects. And birds eat the insects. Here's another. I don't know what this is, but it's cool looking. It's either a wasp or a wasp mimic, but it's not bothering us. And we'll continue on. You'll notice, well, here's what I really wanted to get to is over here we can see that it's pretty, there's a bird flying over there. I don't know what it is. It looks like a swallow. I don't know if the camera will get it. It's quite a ways away. We also can hear birds calling. Talking about mindfulness, I'd been paying attention to the plants and stuff and hadn't paid attention, but I'm hearing different birds now. You probably can hear some of them. Notice this land, this soil is pretty bare in places, but yet it still has a lot of things growing also. And then if we look to this side, here's a little patch of some raspberries and some sumac and some grape, a cherry that's getting hit by the fire, getting stunted by the fire. The oaks are stunted. But we see how much variety is in the landscape. Like the turf grass lawn is a monoculture and there's not variety, and it's just mostly one plant. And here we're just seeing this variety. And here's what I really wanted to get to now. Remember, we are in drought. We had a half an inch of rain in the last 3 or 4 days, and I don't remember when we had rain before that. But what was really impressive, I came here last night just to look at this, and look at this plant here. Here's a really beautiful part. There's a carpet of this plant, and we'll see, we can go in flower. It's in the pea family, or the pea or bean family or group. Pretty little flowers. It is nearing the end of blooming. It's still really beautiful here. And this is goat's rue. And there's a couple different plants that are called goat's rue. This one has a scientific name that ends with Virginiana, which like Virginia, the state. And that's a common, like I believe white-tailed deer are something Virginiana. It was a common scientific name used for a lot of things in North America. But there is a carpet of this plant. We're going to see a lot more of it. And we're in drought conditions. This plant is 8 inches to 12 inches high. blooming up a storm, carpeting the landscape. And I don't know, we'll walk over that way, but if you scan, it's all green with these little cream and pink flowers. This is literally carpeting this landscape right here. So it's providing nectar, it's going to grow it into the seeds. There's vegetation for insects to live on, and we are in drought. This plant, I would love having this in my yard right now blooming. This is called, it's considered it's a woody plant, meaning it doesn't die back in the winter. It keeps some woody stem. It's considered a sub-shrub. So it's a really small shrub. This is all the taller it gets, and 8 to 12 inches. And it has a really deep root system. I don't know how deep, but the reason a lot of these native plants can do okay in a drought year is they have roots that are down 5 feet to 20 feet down. So they're still able to get moisture, where turf grass lawn has a root system that's down 2 to 4 inches. So we'll walk up here. You can see over there in some shade, you can see it's still got more blooms on it. And it's just like so much of this. And we'll turn this corner here. Here's another plant related to the first plant, has similar looking growth. This is lead plant. It has a gorgeous flower with some yellow and some periwinkle light blue, but pretty intense color combination. Lead plant. When this is now this is over a foot tall and growing in drought conditions. If this was in your yard or on a little bit better soil, this can get to be knee high or a little, almost up to waist high. Beautiful flowers, insects love it, pretty foliage, and grows year after year after year. And here's where we can just see more of the carpet of this goat's rue. And when I came here last night scouting it, like, remember, and even look at the vegetation around it. There's not a lot there. There's the cactus, and there's the goat's rue, and there's some oak trees, but there's still a lot of bare soil. But look at this plant with deep roots in drought conditions on sand is beautiful. I mean, when I think of when I came here last night and I saw it, and yesterday was the first that I've seen this plant that I remember, I was like, wow. Compared to a dormant turf grass lawn, I would love a lawn that looked like this right now. And you can see it's behind me, and it's just doing really, really well. It's fun to see it here. And here's some of the flowers. I don't know if you've gotten good. This plant is just so impressive. I'm excited because it's new to me, but the flowers are just really pretty. Here's some of that little brown grass that is done. It's gone to seed. It grew early on. And so I've been talking about natives, I've been talking about insects more than birds, but birds need the insects for food. And what I want you to see here is there's 2 nurseries that sell native plants. And there's native plants for prairie, there's native plants for woodland, there's native plants for other open areas, and there's native plants for sandy soil, there's native plants for good soil, there's native plants for clay soil, and they've lived here for thousands of years, and the insects and the birds that have been here for thousands of years are evolved to feed and to work with them. And so there are 2 nurseries in this area relatively, and they have amazing websites. That's Prairie Nursery and also Prairie Moon Nursery. And so there's 2 different nurseries. Both have prairie in the name because prairie is one of the most endangered ecosystems in the United States, because it was really easy to turn it into farmland, especially in the better soils in the plains and in Illinois. So it turned into farmland. Here in the Wisconsin River Valley, it was sandy. They tilled it down and then it dried up. But they have really amazing websites. You can go there, and if you want to just add some native plants to your landscape, if you want to do a little pollinator native garden, they have ways to sort all their plants where you can say, what is your soil type? What sun exposure do you have? Is it shade, partial shade or sunny. Then you can say like what plant height, what colors do you want, and so you can sort it down to see, do you want blooms in early spring, do you want blooms through the summer? And if you don't check any of those, then you get everything that fits there. And so it's really easy to go to their website and find plants that would work for your site, for your location. And you can choose the height, the bloom time, the color. And so it makes it really easy to choose some of these. And now there's a lot of non-natives that also feed insects and create habitat, so you can do those too. But looking at natives first can really be helpful to our ecosystem and to our plants, to our birds, to our wildlife. And we'll walk a little bit farther. There's just more carpets of this, which is just coming from a turf grass lawn, and then just seeing the carpets of this on sand is pretty amazing to me. You can tell I'm excited. Some bigger oak trees out here that the leaf, I think the Nature Conservancy is working to take this back to an oak savanna, which means oak trees here and there, and then open smaller grasses and flowers here and there. Oh, there's one other part here. I don't know what this grass is, but it's a grass that grew early. I don't see seed heads, but they might be in there. But this grass up here, I noticed like, oh, there's a section here that looks like turf grass lawn and does right now. I don't know what grass it is. I'm not going to walk up there because there's a lot of cactus before it. It could be a native grass. It could be a non-native grass. I don't know. But I just thought it was interesting that, oh, here's this little section that looks like turf grass lawn does right now. I can see there's some lead plant in it, maybe a few milkweed. And here's more of that brown grass that did its life cycle early. There's some more lead plant. And I'm trying to think. So creating a landscape that helps wildlife. I've talked a lot about insects. There's a couple other pieces of information about insects that are pretty shocking. And anybody who's 40 to 50 or older will understand this as I explain it. And it's an interesting survey of insect population. I was born in 68. In the 70s, in the 80s, we had to regularly clean insects off of our windshields if we had driven at night. And actually scientists have realized that this is changing. And what's changing is there are many less insects. And it's a non-scientific survey of like how many insects are killed on your windshield if you drive at night. And I looked up a little bit of information. There was a survey, a study done in Denmark, and things are happening over there very similar to happening here, is that from 2000 to 2017, they did this study almost 20 years long. And now I'm talking about in the 70s and 80s, but their work was from 2000 to 2017, there was an 80% reduction, or the 80% less insects killed on windshields from 2000 to 2017. And then they went and did the scientific survey of the local vegetation around they used nets to try to catch them, and they used sticky traps. And the data from the scientific survey fit the windshield survey. So insects are really going down. I mean, I've talked a lot about insects, and a bunch of us like mosquitoes, they bug me a lot. Ticks, we have to worry about ticks. We'll have to do tick checks when we walk out of here because of Lyme disease. But and when we get out of here. But insects also are a huge part of the ecosystem. And so they are critically important. And the three things that are decreasing their numbers is particularly insecticides. Second, loss of habitat, which turfgrass lawn versus rich ecosystems, and then climate change. But two things that climate change is a bigger thing to deal with, and I won't get into that. But using insecticides and habitat reduction are things that we can do pretty easily. We can change those. Sometimes for growing food or some other things, people need to use insecticides, but there's many times we're using insecticides and pesticides not out of necessity, but more out of want. And so if we can start to think about those things and start looking at having a richer home yard landscape that provides some shelter, provides some habitat, provides some food, and provides some water for habitat, we can have more pleasure in that landscape. And going back to mindfulness, sitting and watching a bird feeder is a really good way for people to like sit, connect to nature, and feel some calmness and some connection to that nature. People working in their gardens. And so we can help ourselves. And there's other things, and I won't get into sounding preachy, but if you want to look up nature deficit disorder, like going into nature calms us down. If you have stress in your life, going into nature, going out and planting plants and feeling a connection, like I planted these and hey, they're growing, can be like this good connection to nature that also is like reducing stress. Having our hands in the soil, or going out and appreciating like these plants that I grew, these plants that I planted are growing. And like when we entered this landscape, and like there are monarch butterflies right there on a couple milkweeds in a pretty dry area, like it changes, it helps them pretty quickly, and seeing that can make us feel better. So it's not that you have to have a landscape that looks like this, but this can be the inspiration. And part of why I mentioned those 2 native landscaping nurseries is that we can look to those for inspiration. And you don't have to have a wild landscape, you don't have to have a wild yard, you don't have to argue with the municipality where you live that might have regulations about that. You can find plants that grow well, that will look nice, and still look good to you, look good to the neighborhood, and still help the insects and help the birds, provide habitat, provide food, and look beautiful. So we don't have to have a wild, crazy landscape to still be doing things for wildlife and birds. That's my point. So this is another way that humans can enjoy the native landscape. And I love this dried seed head right here. I think it is so beautiful, and it would look really beautiful in a dried floral arrangement. And I just think it is so cool. This is from last growing season, and so it's lasted all winter and still looks this good. I mean, you could still pick it and put it in a dried arrangement. And it's called bush clover. It grows up to about waist high. Here is it in this growing. Here's this season's growth, just getting about almost up to knee high now. Here's another one. And it's spread throughout here. But one of the other things in having native landscape, like when we were at that little pollinator garden at the Spring Green Town Hall, there was some of the dried material from last year left there. And you can pick these flowers and bring them in for floral arrangements. And there also are really interesting dried parts that can be enjoyed that you can bring in and have through the winter or into the next growing season too. So we can have these native landscapes and native plants and use them the same way that we use our ornamental flowers. And there are many ornamental flowers that also create habitat and feed insects and feed birds, hummingbirds, and there are many, but natives all help at a little different level, and you can combine them. It's not like you have to plan just a native landscape, or native plant garden, but you can mix them together, and you can, whether you like to just see them, or whether you want to bring cut flowers in, or whether you want to have dried floral stuff, parts, you can do any of that. So this is just one more plant that I really love. So here we are. I mentioned that using natives, or mostly natives, can be done in a lot of ways. And this garden, if we look just down this long way, and then we'll see it do the close-ups, like this garden is mostly natives. I mentioned the orange blooming milkweed, butterfly milkweed. And we'll just walk down through. Here's some more dormant turf grass as we are in dry sand and drought. And as we walk down through here, you'll see This is a mix of mostly natives and some non-natives. The orange there is butterfly milkweed. And we come through here, you'll see there's a mix. This blooms from spring till fall, so you'll see some things that are green. We might see some seed heads. We're gonna have a big semi go by here. And back to mindfulness, like we're aware that there's this sound that is definitely drawing our attention over anything else. I will stop. There. And just what a variety. And one of the other planting styles that you see here is planting really dense to reduce weeds starting to grow, because it's so hard for something to get started when there's so many things already growing so well. So that's another part of what you see here. Here, this is more of this butterfly milkweed. This is such a stunning plant and in full bloom right now. A variety of other things going on, some things that are going to bloom later, things that are finishing up. And you can see part of the garden in the background too also is very nicely done. But this is right on the street, as you all can tell. Something else that's just finished up. And here's a bunch of bumblebees. This is lead plant, which we saw out at the Nature Conservancy land. And I told you it can get almost waist high when it gets better care, not living on its own. You know, it's getting some care. Bumblebees are going crazy on it here, and they're not bothering us. I know people are afraid, and if you have allergies or something, you need to think about this, but take care of yourself. But notice a lot of insects they're super happy getting pollen and nectar. They don't care about us. We don't have anything for them as long as we don't bother them. More of this butterfly milkweed, more lead plant right there. It's just so stunning when you come down the street and see this, and it does not. One of the other things about when you plan a landscape and plant it well, and this is also mulched, is it's actually from spring till fall, it is less hours of work than a turf grass lawn. And that's something people don't think about. And you know, I don't know how many people are given a lawnmower for free, given the fuel and the oil and the blade changes and sharpening for free. Not that many. So turf grass lawn is not without cost and not without time. So here we can see probably some leaf mulch right here. That helps mulch. Mulch is a way to really help reduce weed germination, reduce your weeding time. And then we'll continue on. We'll get Ben in off the street. We can just do a little shot down there. Like, what a beautiful walk along the sidewalk here. Mostly native, getting to be less native, but still really densely planted, and definitely creating a lot of nectar, a lot of habitat, a lot of pollen, and a lot of beauty, and less work than turf grass lawn. And we'll go along here, and right over here we have more dormant turf grass lawn under a tree, but over here it's lush. And I don't know how much they water, but as we saw even out at the Oak Savanna, even without water, and under those trees with the poison ivy at the town hall, we saw when there's most cover on the landscape, things grow better. So we come down along here. It's more. It almost looks like lawn. There's some sedges or grasses in there, some hostas, a pretty little purplish shrub. And we come down here, and so once you get something like this established, as I said, in a growing season, it's actually no more and likely less work than the weekly mowing of turf grass lawn. And it just beautiful birch tree, more little hostas. And here we see a variety of hostas, but here's some of the little ones. So plant selection, working with somebody, really helps you have a landscape that fits. It doesn't get out of control. It doesn't grow over your house. It doesn't look weedy. This is really, like, I don't know what the little grass is here, if it's a grass or a sedge, but it's low growing, and it's not growing 3 to 4 or 5 feet tall. It's these plant choices that either you can do research to figure out, or you work with a landscape designer to help you get it figured out. But that investment in that knowledge is going to save you hours and hours and hours of frustration and work over time. And then we come here, and although I've talked about turf grass lawn, it also serves a purpose. It is a good place for dogs, it's a good place for kids, it's easy to take care of if we want to socialize, if we want to play games. So even though they have this really rich garden, they also have some turf grass lawn. I know that they have dogs, and here's some fun sculpture. I had little sculptures. Here's a very fun sculpture. I'm not sure what it is, but it's interesting. And their garden goes on a little bit more. And then, right, a little shrub, probably a Japanese maple with some different color. So landscape design, playing with adding little pops of color, little pops of sculpture. We can make a landscape be really interesting and yet not that much work. And then there's one other thing that they have back here right alongside the house, which is really low maintenance and really plays a role in a functional landscape, is they have mulch. And they have a wood mulched area. Wood mulched area, you top dress it once a year with a little more mulch and pull a few weeds, and you have a really clean area that might be just for walking by and not touching plants, or not, it keeps it open by the house. So all of these are part of a rich landscape that's less work than turf grass lawn, visually more interesting, and helping birds and all of wildlife. There we go. A cute little pot of pansies back there. A little pop of color. So here we're at my home, my yard, and what I wanted to show is we just saw the natives along the sidewalk in that woman's yard where they're well tended and doing thriving, knee tall things, versus some of the same plants that we saw out at the Nature Conservancy land. Here we've been tending this patch of cacti for 10 years, and they've spread, and we protect them a bit, we pull some weeds out, and they're so beautiful. As we just came up here, there was a bumblebee at them, and we just have them here. Now, a part of putting cacti in your landscape is you need to choose where you do it. You don't want cacti by your front door. You don't want cacti all over, particularly if you have pets or children. So we actually have them in this little corner of our yard, out by the road, and where we have them only in two places, right here and right here. And that's the only place we have them because they do make spines. Now, what you'll also see here is going from that really planted and well-maintained yard, we have a totally wild yard. And I'm not suggesting anyone else has to do this. We're out in the country, we're zoned ag residential. We don't have any mowing restrictions. And so I'll walk in here and Ben will watch so he doesn't walk over the cacti because it will hurt. But here is our yard. We've got white pines, we've got big white pines, we've got oak trees, we've got some red pine. And when we moved in 2008 and it's now 2013, we just let the yard go. It had been being mowed. We're on pure sand. I mentioned it's 165 feet deep sand until it gets down to sandstone. We just let it go. Things grow under the pine trees, just like in the beginning we saw things grow better. We've let black raspberries or black caps grow wild here, and we normally pick about 10 gallons of black caps from our yard. So it's also food producing. We have bird feeders over there. You can't see the house really well, which is totally fine with us. We feel like we are in the woods. Smells good of pine, and right now I can hear a towhee calling. Our bird feeders are over there. We feed the hummingbirds. We have robins and towhees and lots of rose-breasted grosbeak, goldfinch, tufted titmouse, indigo buntings, hummingbirds. There's more than that. Purple finch, house finch, a number of other birds that I can't remember off the top of my head. And so we have raccoons, we have deer, we have a little red fox we saw a couple days ago. And we have some brush here that we need to take to the dump, so we'll like take that out so we don't let piles of brush sit around. But this is the other extreme from what we just saw, but also a native garden, a native yard, and we just let this go. And we do pull some invasives out, we pull some weedy plants out that we don't want to grow, and we just let it be and work with. There's some lilacs over here, you can't really see them very well. Here's some. They don't do very well on the sand and they're not competing very well, but they were here when we moved in, so we just let them be. The biggest thing that we have to do, and I will not hide this, the biggest thing being in the Wisconsin River Valley, the biggest maintenance thing we have in this yard is keeping the poison ivy out. It gets started and we try to dig it every year, and poison ivy has blossoms, poison ivy make berries. I know that chickadees eat the berries, and we actually see the poison ivy coming in, usually under places where birds would perch and they poop out the seeds. But that, otherwise we don't mow, we only water a couple things, and it smells beautiful, it looks, we love it, the birds love it, wildlife loves it, and I can hear, I don't know if you can hear it, I can hear the wind through the pine trees, and this is our totally let go natural landscape. Here's lead plant. Because it's in the shade, it won't bloom as early here, and it's bigger than it was in the natural area, not as big as it was in the tended gardens, but here it is doing on its own, and it's still doing well. It is about knee high, and it will bloom. There's little blooms starting here, and it's just a pretty little native thing, and when ours is blooming, it will have bumblebees too. So just pointing out. And I have some non-natives. Right back here are a couple little lilies that we planted. They're non-native, but they're not really going to take off that much, and so they're here. They add a little pop of color. And so I'm not a purist, but we have a mix of things, and anyone from just one little garden to the long strip like the woman had to like letting it go wild are all options.
Well, gardening, it's so interesting. Vegetables, flowers, fruits. Thank you for tuning in, and oh look. Oh, those strawberries sure look good. Well, we hope you'll come back next week and every week to see what's going on around Richland Center.